Our next speaker is Hadley Heath, and she is a senior policy analyst at the Independent Women's Forum here in Washington. She specializes in healthcare, entitlements, economics, and fiscal policy. And as so many of you know, we all get so bogged down in details, and we are beaten down every time by the other side by their sound bites. So Hadley is going to be talking about economic concepts in plain language, and we all need some help on that. Thank you, Hadley.
Thank you. Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me. I believe in the American dream, and I'm a huge fan of Ronald Reagan. He's someone that I thought about when I was putting this presentation together because I can't think of anyone who did a better job putting economic concepts in plain language, language that resonated with a very broad coalition of Americans across the spectrum. So I'm going to talk a little bit about different types of language that we use. I'm going to make a few suggestions, basically 3 points. I'll tell you at the beginning, then I'll tell you the points in the middle, and then I'll repeat them at the end. That's what makes a good presentation, right? So talk about people, focus on people. That's my first point. Secondly, speak in a language that resonates with your audience. And thirdly, appeal to values that have the broadest support with your audience. So let's get started. I have a clicker. This is an example of convoluted language, right? We as people who believe in the free market, we understand that if we had more economic growth, that would solve a lot of our problems, right? Not only would we have better employment numbers, we'd have better wages, we would also have more revenues if you're somebody who likes to raise government revenues. So we could solve a lot of problems with more GDP growth. We could look into the changes in CPI, CPIU, CPI medical, NDP, all these capital letters are on our side. But nobody was ever motivated to fight for something because of a list of capital letters and all the numbers that go along with them. Instead, here's an example of boiling that same topic down to plain language. I like this example. I couldn't even find who to attribute this to, but it's bounced around the internet several times. You can tell this is a few years old because they list the national debt at about 14 trillion, and it's at least 3 years old, right? So this is what the national debt looks like for your family. That's plain language, and that is good. In fact, that is a lot better than convoluted language. But I would suggest that we don't just need plainer language as free market conservatives, we need compelling language. The national debt is putting Ashley's dreams in jeopardy. I mean, that's a person, okay? You can chuckle, but this is how the left beats us. You know, they put a face on it, they tell you a story about a real person, not just millions of people, because policies affect millions of people. But when you bring it down to one person, you have that spokesperson, you have that person to fight for. We don't get up in the morning and go to work and fight for the GDP. We get up in the morning and fight for Ashley, we fight for our children, we fight for our grandchildren. Those are the people we're fighting for. Here's another example, dollars versus people. It's not a fair fight. I'm a health policy person. This is a panel about land use and property rights, but I'm not a wonk in that area. I talk about healthcare all day long, and I've been talking about it for years. And this is what happens to me every time. I point out that Obamacare is going to add to our national debt by about $6.2 trillion over the long run, that 41% of small businesses have frozen hiring because of Obamacare. And it falls on deaf ears, okay? When the president makes his speech in the Rose Garden, even though I thought that was a terrible speech, he brought out, who did he bring out? Janice Baker from Delaware, the first person to sign up for Delaware State Exchange. After 2 weeks of trying, they're celebrating that finally one person in Delaware got to sign up. But Janice had a pre-existing health condition. And finally, she's able to get health care. And you notice the White House always uses health care when they should be saying health insurance, right? But they won't let a small thing like linguistic accuracy get in their way. They're pointing out that Janice has health care. What did they do during the 2012 election cycle? I work for a women's organization. They pulled out Julia. Which audience do you think they were going for there? Exactly me, exactly my demographic. Young, unmarried women who want to know how these policies are going to affect us. Well, they told us the story of Julia's life, and at every turn in Julia's life, Obama was there to help her out when Romney's plans would have really dogged her. So that's a story, not a real person, but a person with a name. This is from a progressive communications consulting group, and I looked around their website for a while. This is a really sharp group. They say, you know, why is it that conservatives always win? And I thought that was funny because I've only been in Washington a few years, but we haven't been winning very much around here. But they had some good points about communications. They said if you want to engage your audience and shift public debate, you will need to identify the mental models that shape how people see the world. Understanding the semantic frames, also known as mental models, that shape how different communities understand the issue is the key to any successful campaign. Bottom line, when you come in with a message in plain, compelling language, you also need to understand where is it that your audience stands on this issue in their understanding, their basic education, their preferences, their attitudes, their worldviews, and all of those things shape how they're going to frame your message. At the Independent Women's Forum, we have a sister organization called Independent Women's Voice that did some polling on the Paycheck Fairness Act. Now, naturally, this is an issue that's very important to us as women. The wage gap. I assume a lot of things about what women think about the wage gap. I assume a lot of things because I am a woman. I've had an experience in the workforce. My experience has been very good. I've never felt like sexual discrimination has been a problem in my workplace. But when we asked women in a survey, how many of you think that sexual discrimination is a serious problem in the workplace, 74% of women said, yes, it is a serious problem. I also assume that a lot of people understand the statistic, 77 cents on a dollar. How many of you heard that statistic? I assumed that people understood we're not talking apples to apples there. We're not talking doctors to doctors. We're not talking teachers to teachers. But many women didn't understand that. So asking your audience first, what do you think about this? And really listening. I mean, really poring over and listening to the survey results before you jump in with your message. Because imagine if I go on TV and I say, sexual discrimination is not a problem in the workplace. If 74% of the women who are listening to me on TV hear me say that, they've already tuned me out. They think she doesn't know what she's talking about. She doesn't know my experience. And then I talked with my mom about this. She used to work in an accounting firm. She said when she started out, a young woman who was a receptionist got pregnant, and they stuck her in the back because that was so unprofessional that she got pregnant, and you just couldn't have a pregnant woman working reception. And I thought, oh, well, that was a different time, I guess. But we have a lot of pregnancies at Independent Women's Forum, and we don't think it's unprofessional. But here's, I think it's a great thing. So we designed an experiment to go along with this survey. First, we asked them, what do you think about the things? Then we separated them into different groups, a control group and groups to hear different messages, right? And we commissioned Evolving Strategies to do this. They're a great experiment design communications firm here in DC. And one of the groups heard a progressive message. They read something, I think, that Debbie Wasserman Schultz wrote about the wage gap. Then another group heard her message and a message about how this is going to impact our economy if we enact something like the Paycheck Fairness Act, if we enact more regulations on women's pay. Then a third group heard Debbie Wasserman Schultz's message with a message about how women's choices affect what we earn. And then finally, we had a fifth group that heard all three messages: Debbie, the economy, and women's choices. Follow? Then we reviewed the results, and what do you think happened? Well, more women were persuaded to agree with us that the Paycheck Fairness Act was a bad idea when they heard about the harm it would do to the economy. So we used that information when we created our product, which was an educational video about the wage gap. We knew that before we even began to talk about the Paycheck Fairness Act, we needed to give about 1 or 2 minutes explanation of what the statistics from the Department of Labor mean. We knew that we needed to talk about the red tape that would be enacted as a result of the Paycheck Fairness Act and how that would impact different businesses and our economy at large. So if we have time at the end, I'll come back and show you this. It's a 3-minute video. I think it's very effective, and it's an economic concept in plain language. But what did we do? We got to know our audience, and we did an experimental survey where we actually used different messages, because the world is not a vacuum. People are not just going to hear our message. They're going to hear our message and a message from the left, and we have to figure out in a dynamic setting how will they respond to those different messages. The last thing that I'm going to talk about is appealing to moral values that have the broadest support. This is another case where you really need to know your audience. If you are a grassroots advocate and your only goal is to really get people who already agree with you to be more excited about agreeing with you, then you have a different goal than someone like me. I consider my job to be sort of, if politics were in an analogy with religion, I consider myself a missionary. I'm going out, there's sinners, saints, and savables. I'm going for the savables, because the saints already, I believe there's a lot of great people working with the saints to get them excited, to get them to walk door to door. There are sinners who I don't believe we'll ever reach. We can move on and focus on the savables. So I'm trying to appeal to the broadest audience. I work at the Independent Women's Forum. I'm looking to reach independents and women. You can decide for yourselves who are you trying to reach and then apply this accordingly. But how many of you are familiar with Jonathan Haidt? He's a moral psychologist from NYU. He's got a great book, several great books actually. One is called The Happiness Hypothesis. Another one's called The Righteous Mind. This is directly from The Righteous Mind. He talks about moral foundations theory, how we make decisions about what is right and what is wrong. Because so much of politics, so many policy debates boil down to how do we decide what is right and what is wrong. And that's just as true in economic policy as it is in social policy. But the different moral values that he asked people about were the following. Care, harm, care. Is someone being harmed? If someone's being harmed, then people consider it wrong, right? Is it fair? If it's unfair, it's wrong. Does it invade or oppress someone's liberty? Is it an act that demonstrates loyalty, or if it's disloyal, unloyal, then it's wrong? Is it an act that disobeys authority, that is disrespectful of authority? Is it something that violates something that is sacred, something that has some innate sanctity? And he asked these questions, and the reasons I've colored the values this way is because his results showed the following. All 6 of the values are things that people who self-identify as conservative use to frame a moral question. We ask all 6 questions, okay, if you consider yourself a conservative. If you self-identify as progressive or liberal, you're primarily focused on whether or not someone's being harmed or whether or not there's a fairness principle that's being violated. Are people being treated equally, okay? So the first 2 values that I've highlighted here have the broadest appeal. And I've come up with sort of an example. I tried to tie in property rights and land use a little bit, but here are some example messages. We're endowed by our Creator with the right to life, liberty, and property. These rights are sacrosanct. What value am I appealing to there? Sanctity. That is a sacred right. Don't violate my right. I have the right to this property because I have the deed. That could be very much true. That's appealing to the authority of a document that we call a deed. If this ballot measure passes, my family will lose our property that we have worked for generations to maintain. That is, I thought maybe that was about is someone being harmed or someone being cared for, but it's also a fairness issue too. People should be free to do what they choose with their private property. Government shouldn't take it away. That's a liberty issue, right? It's not fair that these zoning restrictions put some neighborhoods at a disadvantage. Fairness, yeah, disadvantage. Woo, social justice. Those are in their dictionary. We farmers understand what it's like to have our land threatened, and we need to stick together. That's a loyalty thing, right? You're in the club. We understand each other because we have a loyalty with each other. So the 2 messages here that appeal to the values that the most people say that they use to rate something as wrong or right are these 2 messages. They may not seem like the most important to us or carry the most weight with us. In fact, among this room, we could probably take a poll, and different people would say that different messages felt more important, felt more significant. But if you're looking to appeal to the broadest values, whether or not someone's being harmed and whether or not people are being treated fairly, those are the ones that, according to the work of a moral psychologist, will appeal to the broadest audience. So in summary, we're going to fight for people. Just look back at any of your work, whether it's flyers you put together, a Facebook status update, the different messages that you're framing. When you get up to talk at a town hall meeting, are you talking about people or are you talking about numbers? There's nothing wrong with talking about numbers. In fact, it's very important to talk about the costs and to talk about cost-benefit analyses. But if we're talking solely about costs and they're talking about benefits, we're completely talking past each other. We need to meet them on their battlefield because our policies help people too. They protect people. They protect our rights. They protect our freedom. They protect our property. We need to talk about that and tell the stories of those individuals who are affected. I was a journalism major too, and they told us, as a reporter, you guys are going to laugh at this, as a reporter, your job is to be completely objective. When you need to use different points of view, you get something called subjective sound bites from people who are affected. And my professor, I remember him telling us a story, and he showed us a Spanish news station, and it had the name of the person in the lower third. That's the graphic at the bottom that says their name. And then it said, el afectado. And in Spanish, that means the affected. Okay? So we need to go to the people who are the affected and get them to tell their stories and help them tell their stories. Also, we're going to speak in language that we know our audience will be willing to accept. If we come in swinging with the kind of language that they don't understand or they don't see eye to eye with your very first premise, then they're much more likely to tune us out. And finally, we should try to appeal to values with the broadest support for our audience. So again, if you're going for an audience that is the saints and you want to get the choir to sing a little louder, that's awesome. Thank you for doing that work. If you want to reach the savables, you may want to think about not everyone has the same ears that we have. Not everyone hears things the same way that we inside of this room hear those messages. So not only do we want to focus on plain language, but we want to focus on compelling language to bring people to our side. I too have some suggestions for homework if anyone's interested in this topic further. The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt is a great book. Arthur Brooks expands on that moral psychology work in his book, The Road to Freedom. The Arrowhead is a great book about compelling language, messages, telling stories. It wasn't even a book that was really necessarily written for political communication. It's really a business book about how to make a business pitch. And I hate this as much as anybody, but politics has become more about marketing in many respects than it is about the ideas. And we're going to lose if we continue to talk just about the ideas while the other team does really great marketing. Defending the Free Market is by the president of the Acton Foundation. If you're interested in sort of the moral case for the free market, that's a great read. And also I'm going to plug Liberty is No War on Women, which is a book from our directors at the Independent Women's Forum that explains why the policies of the left and the victim politics that they're playing with women's minds are actually not beneficial to women or men in our society. So that's all I have. If you guys want to watch our wage gap video, we may have time. I'm not sure. It looks like I've got 3 minutes left in my 20-minute allotment. So my dad saw this wage gap video, and he said every person in the United States should have to watch this. So let's see. Can you click on it for me, Randall? It should link to the YouTube. Do you have internet in here? Oh, well, there's no internet in here. So I'll just tell you. Oh, there is. Okay. Okay. Sorry. I'm surprising Randall. If you're interested in watching it again later or sending it to a friend, I'll tell you how to get to it yourself. You can go to YouTube and search for Straight Talk about the wage gap. Or you can go to our website, iwf.org, and I think it's still on our homepage, but you can always just Google Straight Talk about the wage gap video, and I think you'll find, I hope you'll find our video. There are a lot of other women's organizations who do work on the wage gap, and we don't see eye to eye. But you'll know as soon as you read. All right, I'm going to yield and let the technology experts sort this out, and I'll be around for questions later. Thanks.